The Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, are the Emperor's Wrath made flesh. They're genetically engineered super soldiers clad in ceramite armor, feared across 1,000,000 worlds. These are warriors who never stop, never falter, and they never die easy. But what if they already looked dead? What if these beings of war appeared as though they'd fallen in battle only to rise once more when the dust had settled to continue their assault? How do you fight an enemy that shouldn't even be alive? Their guts spill freely from their armor, yet they march on unfazed. Their skin, or at least what's left of their skin, falls off in chunks as they are pounded by unrelenting torrents of las bolts, not even attempting to seek cover. These are the Death Guard, the Emperor's 14th Legion, now diseased and corrupted beyond imagining. They've turned their back on the Emperor's light and embraced the warm, oozing decay of Nurgle. Behind them, they leave not just corpses, but entire worlds lost to rot and decay. These are no longer Space Marines, but Plague Marines. They are the final bloated horror that even death might flee from. The Death Guard are perhaps one of the coolest parts of 40K for myself, somebody who has been a major fan of almost everything zombie related in pop culture over the years, whether it's George Romero's Of the Dead films, Left 4 Dead, The Walking Dead, Project Zomboid, 28 Days, 28 Weeks, soon to be 28 years later. Because I think Aaron Taylor Johnson may be one of the most attractive men in Hollywood, alongside Henry Cavill, but don't tell my wife, although she already knows and probably agrees with me. Really anything zombie related, you can probably be sure that I'm a big fan of it, especially movies like Rec 1 and Rec 2. I absolutely adore those for being actually mortifying. First time watching those films, my friend and I, when we watched them together, actually had to pause the movie at one point, flee from the basement, freak out, take a chill pill for a little bit before we went down and finished the movie. Like, they are incredible. That's why I love the Death Guard and really anything to do with Nurgle. I mean, zombie Space Marines, hell yeah, dude. Banana bread at work today? Hell yeah, dude.
Banana bread at fucking work, dude! Hell yeah!
The Plague Marines, the Death Guard, are usually surrounded by hordes of zombies. Oh no, my mouse. It still works. Crisis averted. These are people that have been corrupted and plagued by Nurgle and no longer really exercise will of their own. They have been forced and rotted away into this creature, these nightmare beings that just hunger for you. Basically, any world or place that the Death Guard attack is usually going to be overwhelmed by these rot-infested little guys running around causing a ruckus. Poxwalkers, zombies, whatever you want to call them, are let loose on the Death Guard's victims and anyone that Nurgle extends an invite to his garden to. One of the most incredible things about Nurgle and the Death Guard is the exploration of really all three vessels of zombie transformation in pop culture. At least there are three in my mind that always jump out. There's the undead, dead coming back to life, which is stuff like in George Romero's movies, Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, stuff like that, where dead people come back to life as zombies and come for you. There's the infected, transmissible disease, virus, or something like that, like in 28 Days Later. Zombieland is mad cow disease. There's The Last of Us, which is cordyceps, and the crazies, which is like a government created crazy mind virus that's gonna eat you. It's gonna eat you and drive you nuts, and you're gonna kill your family and friends. And then there's potentially my favorite, the possessed, where a demonic force or spiritual force takes control of the victim. This is going to be like Rec 1 and Rec 2, although it's explored more in Rec 2 to be that. The Evil Dead and Pet Cemetery, I think, kind of falls into here, although that's like a cursed Native American burial ground. So I think that one falls kind of in the undead and the possessed. And there are really few universes that explore all three elements like Warhammer 40K, which I think sets it apart. Like I said, it comes from Nurgle, a god, a chaos god, or his demons. The disease, the plague, is spread and is in worship of the cycle of death and what comes after. Nurgle has his own greater and lesser demons. You've got at the low end, you've got Nurglings. Probably at like the tippity top, you've got stuff like the Great Unclean Ones, who actually have the ability to create and spread their own plagues, like Kugoth, who was a Nurgling who fell into Nurgle's pot and became this big boy and now uses Nurgle's own pot to come up with his own plagues and spread them. Also like Rodriguez, who is like, you know, kind of a little stinker, literally and metaphorically. For those that worship him and love him, including the Death Guard, these plagues are considered blessings to them. They're his way of showing that you are in his favor. They're not going to kill you. They're just going to warp and twist you in horrifying, but also beautiful ways. There's going to be transformations to your bodies. You might grow tentacles, horns, extra mouths, lots of teeth. You're going to be rotting away and have festering wounds. Not that you can feel them. They won't kill you, and you become resilient and immune to pain. You're not going to feel any of the transformations really on you. That's one of his major blessings, is that you are so resilient and strong that you can weather so much damage and still be able to continue the fight. And then there's also the infection vector. You will become a vehicle of his plagues, and just by proximity to somebody that is uninfected, you can infect them, or your weapons. Sometimes your weapons will be like, instead of a chain sword with the typical like chainsaw teeth, it'll be actual teeth with like saliva, and just as you attack somebody and your chain sword cuts into them, it's like a little bite. Just go like, here, there, have some infection. Now you're also give it 24 hours and you're going to be fighting next to me, not against me. If you worship Nurgle, if you're one of his cultists or one of his demons or one of his champions, anything like that, you appreciate and you hasten the cycle of death and rebirth. But most people focus on the death part, and I kind of understand why. It's a big deal. The fall of the Death Guard, however, are one of the greatest tragedies for the Imperium and one of the greatest accomplishments for Nurgle. This is the last thing that the Primarch of the Death Guard, Mortarion, would have ever wanted. My first introduction to the Death Guard in Mortarion, outside of hearing about it through lore channels, was in the book Lords of Silence by Chris Raitt. Of course, I listen on Audible like I do with all the books, so it was narrated by John Banks, who does a pretty freaking good job, dude. Pretty freaking good job. I knew already I was gonna fall in love with it because it is just like two of my favorite things smashed together. It's Warhammer and zombies just combined, and like, you know, what are you gonna hate about that? But I didn't expect to love it as much as I really did. In this book, you follow the Death Guard, and it's kind of if you're not used to following the chaos perspective, it's very interesting because it's like, okay, how are these obviously horrible, demented, warped, twisted creatures going to be a protagonist of any kind? And I mean, they're not really. They're still like, you know, they're the bad guys, right? But there is a layer of relatability, which I'll get into soon. The book follows the Death Guard after the fall of Cadia, which I'm working on a video for, coming soon potentially. But you follow them as they are unleashed on the galaxy, and they're seeking to spread Nurgle's domain, bringing people into his garden, whether that be through invitation, invasion, or infection. We hear about how the Death Guard talk about Mortarion, their Primarch. They talk about him as if he's like a damaged person. He's pretty broken, to some point like lost in his own psyche. We know that he hates his father, the Emperor, for being a hypocrite. He hates his circumstances because turning to chaos is the last thing he ever would have wanted, especially being a slave to one of the chaos gods, Nurgle. And he hates himself for falling to this icy embrace, the very thing that he sought to destroy. The Death Guard might be known also as the Unbroken.
The Dusk Raiders were forgotten, leaving us with two new names. To the rest of the universe, we were indeed the Death Guard. Among ourselves, we were the Unbroken.
But Mortarion is not. Mortarion joined Horus and the rebellion against the Empire, not to join chaos or pledge to one of their gods, because he despised sorcery and its use. He couldn't stand the Emperor's hypocrisy, such as making the use of sorcery forbidden despite the Emperor being the most powerful psyker in the universe. Once Mortarion had turned against the Emperor, however, the only allies to be found were those who had fully embraced chaos in the warp. Not the most honest folk following not the most honest gods. He and his legion became trapped in the warp, the immaterium, through which you travel to traverse the galaxy at any amount of speed. They were exposed to a devastating plague, and it was only after insane amounts of suffering that he accepted Nurgle's offer to free them of the plague in exchange for their fealty. Rather than wipe the Death Guard free of the plague, they were simply made immune to its ill effects. And Mortarion became a demon prince, a demon Primarch. When the Horus heresy failed and the only place left for the Death Guard and Mortarion, all of them, to flee was into the Eye of Terror, Nurgle gave them their own planet within the Eye called the Plague Planet. It's a demon world infected with every known pathogen in the galaxy, and a place they call home. The thing is, the Death Guard didn't just get infected, they became infection. Their skin fused with their ceramite armor, another one of Nurgle's gifts, making them even more resistant to damage, and their ships mirrored their corruption, becoming overgrown with decaying flesh, teeth, and more. How could such a monstrous and twisted legion ever be seen or see themselves as the good guys? Well, I don't think they do, and I don't think we're supposed to, but there are ways to find them relatable. The Death Guard are, I would say, really not so much a horror story so much as a tragedy. Like the rest of the Imperium at the time, they were led to believe the Imperial truth, which obfuscated and suppressed the true nature of the warp, chaos gods, and their influence. The Imperial truth, not the truth. How could anybody in the galaxy be prepared to combat these forces, the influence, if they're not fully informed on how to do so? The answer is they couldn't. Many were driven away from the Emperor as they realized that this Imperial truth was more of an Imperial lie. That, or they were seduced by the forces of chaos, not realizing how rascally and the shenanigans these guys were up to. In the case of Mortarion, however, one led to the other. The Death Guard really represent the human temptation to let go. While Astartes in general are supposed to be seen as more than human, the ones that are still loyalists are seen as the Emperor's angels, but in a lot of ways they are still very, very human. The Death Guard were forsaken, abandoned, trapped, and diseased. Hope seemed far from them when a warm, quiet voice whispered to them,
"It's okay. Stop fighting. I'll take the pain away. You'll never be alone again."
When framed like that, no matter how horrifying the aftermath of what your decision is, I can understand making that decision. When you're in that much pain and your body twisting, transforming in ways that you would never imagine, I can understand wanting to take that away. And that's why the offer from Nurgle was accepted. Now the Death Guard carry his gifts as a message to their former empire. They were victims of circumstance.
I am a victim of a hate crime.
And they found peace through surrender. And this is a theme common throughout the Warhammer universe. One character represents this better than most and is a relatable touchstone to readers or listeners of this vast universe, and especially this book following the most grotesque beings in Warhammer 40k. In the book, the Death Guard assault the agro world Najan, one of many planets dedicated solely to the production of crops to feed the Imperium and its numerous armies. Like every world, Najan has its own planetary defense force with one Captain Gaval Dantine serving among them. The Death Guard overwhelmed the PDF of Najan, this planet-sized farm, and Dantine, rather than being killed, is taken as a prisoner. I think I'd probably rather just die than be taken as a prisoner by the Death Guard, and I think Dantine initially thinks so too. The reason he's taken captive is that Vorx, the siege master of the Death Guard ship the Solace, sees that Dantine has more proficiency with a weapon than the rest of these, typical PDF rabble who have never really seen a fight. Because Dantine had served 15 years in the Astra Militarum before ever being stationed on Najan, Vorx doesn't exactly interrogate him, but just simply asks him questions, asking about his history, how he became so proficient, stuff like that. And Dantine knows that he shouldn't answer, he should resist, but in a galaxy so full of horror that life for the average person is inhumane, to put it mildly, why make it harder for yourself than it needs to be? So he answers Vorx's questions. Perhaps this is because he's making the choice himself to be compliant, or perhaps he simply cannot resist now being a slave to the Death Guard. In fact, Vorx even opens up the bag on his hip, pulls out Dantine's own heart and shows it to him, and that's when Dantine puts his hand to his chest and feels the scar of it being cut out. All across the universe of Warhammer 40k, especially in stories following the forces of chaos, you'll find good people, strong people of the Imperium, ultimately accepting their fate. When they're taken by chaos, they take the path of least resistance to make their lives as easy as possible with the least amount of pain and anguish. Of course, there are the zealots and the true believers who do resist to the very, very end. But for the most part, people are pretty willing to just kind of shift loyalties if it makes their life easier. You can fight it and go mad, or you can accept it and live in your new reality. Sometimes with more freedom than you would have had in the Imperium. That doesn't necessarily mean that your life is gonna be better, but you have a little bit more that you're not as strictly regimented as you were in the Imperium. Dantine, now a prisoner and slave of the Death Guard, is allowed to basically roam the ship freely, because like, where is he gonna go? They're in the middle of space, the void. So slowly throughout the book, he comes to terms with his situation, and though still believing himself to be a soldier of the Imperium, and if push comes to shove and he has the opportunity, he will rejoin the Empire. But it's not until the Death Guard attacks Sabatine, the homeworld for the Astartes chapter, the White Consuls, that Dantine is forced to really face his new self. The Death Guard, like I said, are always surrounded by hordes of zombies and those under their thrall. Dantine is dumped alongside the rest of the Death Guard slaves, their human captives, fighting on the front line, taking the world of Sabatine. He sees this, however, as an opportunity to join the defenders. He might be on the attacking side, but he wants to turn on his captors, those who have enslaved him, but he doesn't know how warped he's truly become, because on the Solus there aren't any mirrors and he can't see what these plagues and this time with the Death Guard has done to him. He calls out to them and he tries to tell them, like, don't shoot, I will fight with you. But all he receives in return for his efforts is las fire. Dantine is hit several times and is knocked to the ground, and while down, he finally sees himself for the first time in a long time in a muddy puddle. This is when he realizes just how corrupted he has become. Dantine is unrecognizable to even himself. When did he lose all of his teeth? When did his hair fall out? How long has his skull been visible beneath his scalp? He's a horrifying sight to behold, even to himself, so no wonder these PDF forces shot at him. He looks just like all of the other plague walkers. Why did this happen to him? Is it because of the Death Guard's claim on him? Is it because he didn't fight harder to resist accepting his new life and thus accepted what came with it? It doesn't really matter, but seeing this, Dantine once again accepts his new reality. He accepts his fate and begins firing on those he sought to join, fully accepting the monster he saw looking back at himself in the mud. It raises some questions when you're looking at the vast ranks of chaos. How many are true believers in these ruinous powers? Are there actual fanatics? And how many are more like Dantine, who just kind of go along with their circumstances until it's just the natural order of things for them? Which is worse? Sure, there are hordes of the mindless zombies, plague walkers, pox walkers, zombies, whatever you want to call them, swelling the armies of Nurgle. One of their greatest tools is spreading a plague that steals your population and enfolds them into their own numbers. These plagues can convert your army into their army. Warhammer 40k Darktide has one of the perfect examples of this and shows the various ways that people turn to chaos. Dantine may have just been one guardsman who fell to chaos after enough time had passed, but in Darktide, an entire regiment of renowned and even considered heroic guardsmen, the Mobian 6th, abandoned the Imperium for chaos, turning on their home world to support a Nurgle worshipping cult, the Cult of Admonition. The cult is wreaking havoc across the hive city of Tertium on their home world of Atoma Prime. The Mobian 6th are heroes. They're renowned for battle across the Mobian sector, but it's over their time fighting that they become seduced by Nurgle. It's when they are turned to for help that they reveal that they have gone traitor and join with the cult. They spread pox and plague that turn the citizens of Atoma Prime to mindless beasts that throw themselves at you in massive hordes. And this is where I really like Darktide. It's probably one of my favorite games right now. Just the Left 4 Dead elements with progression kind of deal. I want to make a whole video just on Darktide because I think it is such a rewarding game to play. And this is where I want to talk about entire regiments being turned by these plagues to chaos. While the Mobian 6th might have willingly turned to Nurgle, the Mobian 21st is a regiment of guardsmen that were transformed by the same pox that turned citizens into pox walkers. This entire regiment is coming at you in mindless hordes, still wearing their guard armor. They are a stolen army made into monsters. Dantine might not have chosen to be taken by the Death Guard, but he sure didn't fight the influence of Nurgle all that hard. He didn't fall to chaos because he was evil or hated the Imperium, but simply because he, like many other people in the Imperium in the 41st and 42nd millennia, is broken and tired. In the end, the Death Guard aren't just zombie space marines. They're a horrifying look into the dark side of human nature. When strength stagnates, when drive sputters out, and when you'll do or accept anything for your pain to be taken away. They embody every trope in zombie media. Undead, they're walking corpses held together by rot. Infected, they embrace and spread plague throughout the galaxy. Possessed, they serve a god whose power literally reshapes them into monsters. To experience them would be a horror story, but as a reader, they're less of a horror story and more of a tragedy, and a relatable one. That is the true horror of Nurgle. Not the rot, the disease, the plague, or the horrifying transformations, but how comforting it all sounds when you've suffered enough. Thank you so much for watching this epic Warhammer video. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the franchise, of the Death Guard, of it all. I think it's all really cool stuff. I can't wait for this Henry Cavill TV show to come out. So,
Be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that like button.
hit subscribe down below and hit the bell so you never miss one of my videos. There's more coming at you soon, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned for another one of my super epic awesome Warhammer videos. Lore, books, we cover it all.
I'll see you later. Bye-bye.